Hey guys, GamerZach here, and welcome to Some Kind of Review for Cossacks 3. Now, Some Kind of Review is a format that I do where basically I talk about the facts of a game, what I think about it, and then when I'm done with all my points, I stop talking. And just for transparency, I do have to say that I did receive a review code for Cossacks 3 provided by the developers GSC Game World. So, clear enough? So, let's get on with what I think about Cossacks 3, starting with the facts of it. So, what is Cossacks 3? Well, it's a 17th and 18th century setting for an RTS game, and it's more of a remake of the original game, Cossacks European Wars, that launched in 2000. And as far as I understand, they're sort of trying to remake the original game rather than the second game because the second game was less well received. Now, in terms of Cossacks 3, it supports up to 10,000 units on the map, land and sea. There are 12 nations, 70 unit types, 100 research options, and 140 different historical buildings. Now, this does sound like a lot, but in terms of actual gameplay, a lot of these things have similar functions, but they're slightly different, or they look different, depending on which nation you're playing as. Now, there are 5 single-player historical campaigns, a skirmish mode, and multiplayer. Alright, that's about the facts of Cossacks 3. Now, on to the actual gameplay. So, starting with the campaign, there's some interesting things with them, but first of all, each campaign mission is quite long. It could easily take you 1 or 2 hours to finish each mission, because there's sort of these large maps and involve a lot of different actions and exploring and all of that. But one thing that I really do like about the campaigns in Cossacks 3 is there's this certain RPG-esque element while exploring the map. You discover side quests and bonuses, like you discover villagers in the wood and then they join your faction. And you even open up dialogue and choices through dialogue, which was a very unexpected but nice addition that added some personality to the campaign. Like you could come across a certain merchant down a road, and you actually get to choose whether to execute him or to ask him to continue to inform you of certain things. And he'll then walk over to your town, which will then open up more options. So that sort of RPG-esque elements in the campaign is actually really nice. Now, the problem I had with the campaign is that instructions in the campaign, like what you're supposed to do, your objectives, were quite unclear, and it wasn't always clear what you were supposed to be doing at that moment in the campaign. So I often got lost and wasn't exactly sure what to do. Like it would tell you to capture certain forts, but it wouldn't actually tell you how to do it. And for someone who's unexperienced with Cossacks, you wouldn't actually know how to take this fort. One particular issue I got confused with was that I had to take over this fort, but it was surrounded by walls, and normal units can't attack or destroy walls. So I just didn't know what to do at that point in time. I also just overall didn't feel too invested in what was going on in the campaign. Now, there was a story and there were certain characters, historical figures, and goals like, oh, we're trying to fight off the Turks or chase down these guys or help our allies, but it still felt very clinical. It felt like we were going to achieve tasks and just taking our troops, building up an army and defeating the enemy in a very sort of strategic way. I didn't really feel like I was involved in the wars that were going on, and I didn't feel a part of the story. I didn't feel a part of history playing through some of the Cossacks missions, and it really did sort of feel like I was just going down a checklist. And a final note on the campaign is that the writing is a bit weird. Now, I was of course playing the English version, and it still had grammar mistakes and a couple spelling mistakes, which is not too bad, but the tone was inconsistent. It would sort of jump between 17th and 18th century styled writing with very modern sort of speech in the dialogue, saying things like Your Excellency, but then also saying we gotta take the French down a notch. And that's pretty immersion breaking when you're trying to get into the whole historical aspect of it. And generally it feels like all the English writing was written by a non-native English speaker. And it does have to be said that none of the text is narrated in any way. There's no narration or voice acting at all in Cossacks 3 as far as I can tell. But moving on from the campaign, we can talk about the aesthetics of Cossacks 3. And visually, it's stunning. It looks great. The texture work is crisp and clear, even at maximum zoom. And the buildings and the unit models are fantastically detailed. Zooming in on some of the buildings in the town centers, you can really see the detail and the study they did in terms of making these buildings and units historically accurate. And just looking at the game, the overall style as a whole, it does mesh together very well. And it does give you this very historical feeling, like you are playing a historical game. And that was generally fantastic. In terms of the music, I initially didn't like it because when I received the review copy of the game, I thought the music was way too busy and way too confusing and distracting for trying to think of your strategies. But it turns out that there was a bug that ended up playing 2 music tracks at the same time. So going back in after they fixed that bug, and listening to music again, it sounds much cleaner. So it seems like I was experiencing that bug, and the music itself is okay. I wouldn't say it's iconic in any way. I'm not remembering any tunes from the game, but it sort of adds to the atmosphere and it's nice enough. But on the looks of the game, I do have to say map variety is limited. The terrain you have, the grassy sort of hilly terrain, it looks great, but that's all you're getting at the moment. There's no snow or desert maps as far as I can tell. In the campaign or in skirmish modes or in multiplayer, there's no map types. You just sort of select certain map options. And even on the gameplay size, there doesn't seem to be any way of choosing the map size. There's just one fixed map size, which is huge. Whether you're playing 1v1 or with 8 players, you just get this one huge map. Anyway, moving on to strategy. This is a strategy game, so this is what's pretty much the most important point. The strategy in terms of gameplay. And just overall, in terms of a strategy game, it feels much more purposeful with choices and movements of your troops. Now, even though this is a real-time strategy, it is less about micro and much more about macro with tactics and your decisions of which units you want to train and what upgrades to get. Like, you could try micro some of your units, like of course you want to send your light cavalry round to attack the enemy archers and things like that, but good macro and good choices will outperform any sort of micro in this game. And the most micro that you're going to be doing is probably controlling your workers and just trying to position your troops where they need to be, especially once your armies get to quite large sizes. You need to sort of try and make sure everything is in position. The multitude of units and upgrades to choose from is where the choices come into play. Now, I did mention that there were 70 unit types, but it's not quite as complex as that sounds. Basically, every nation has some sort of pikeman, some sort of swordsman, and some sort of musketman. And in terms of cavalry, there's light cavalry, heavy cavalry, and some sort of range cavalry, whether it's muskets or archers. Then you have your artillery units, which are just a couple, and then you have some naval units, where you have like water transports and some military vessels as well. And that's basically it. So even though each nation has their own sort of unique units, gameplay-wise, they still sort of play out quite similarly. Though I do have to say water units and transports do open up another side of strategy that's quite interesting. The naval units do move quite slowly, but having cannons firing at a coastal base is something that's quite interesting. And eventually the whole large-scale battles is what it all builds up to, where you need to control your infantry, your cavalry, your range units, your artillery, all of that together to be as effective as you can. And it does have to be said that friendly fire is a thing, and your archers and artillery can totally kill your own units. So you can't just rush everything forward. You do need to position things properly, taking advantage of the terrain, especially if there's cliffs and hills that you can use to your advantage. All of that is very important. So in terms of strategy and gameplay, Cossacks 3 is very, very deep and very, very detailed, and it does play out very satisfyingly. Now, as we're talking about war, I can talk about AI. Overall, throughout the game, difficulty starts at normal and goes up to impossible, and it's sort of implying that there's no particularly easy mode for those unfamiliar with RTSs or Cossacks. 1v1 versus a normal AI is easy enough once you learn a basic build order by copying the AI, but it's still competent enough to not fall to a slow stream of units if you give them a little time to build up. Because I did try that. I did try sort of just spamming units and flowing them to the enemy base, and they're able to defend themselves. You do still need to use some tactics to take out a normal AI. Moving up to the impossible AI, it's good enough at defending themselves. They build up quite quickly and setting up defensive towers while moving troops across the map to harass and invade. So as far as I can tell, the AI is pretty competent and should put up enough of a challenge. But I wasn't able to find out whether the impossible AI was cheating at all with the resources or whether it was actually good AI. They do spend quite a lot of resources into gaining more resources and building more mines and stuff like that, but it didn't feel like it was cheating. It still felt like It was following the rules of the game. Now, on to multiplayer in Cossacks 3. It functions pretty much like a skirmish mode, just with real people instead of AI. You start the game, you build up your base, you build your town center, collect resources. You got food, wood, coal, iron, gold, and stone, not in that order. And once you build up your base, got your farms going, and started to build up a military and researching things, then it pretty much functions like a skirmish game, just like any other. In terms of getting into a multiplayer game, well, there's chat rooms and the usual basic stuff. Though setting up and joining games feels very clunky, as there aren't really different game modes, just map and starting options. So if you want to do a 2v2, you basically have to get people to agree to it. You can't actually set up a room and set it to 2v2. And because there's no fixed maps, it's all randomized maps. You basically just choose the map type, like whether you want islands or river or just highlands and have a flat land map. And right now, about 24 hours after release, it is still rather buggy. I found some buttons don't really work when creating a room, or they pop up and disappear immediately, and stability is definitely an issue. It is a bit laggy in-game, giving instructions and stuff, telling my troops to move and all of that does have a bit of lag, but it's not that much of an issue because it's not a twitchy game. But sometimes things worked weirdly, like when I tried to combine my troops into a formation, it didn't work. And sometimes units just walked off in random directions for I'm not sure what reason. And on stability side, I did often disconnect or lose connection to a game when I'm playing, causing the game to hang and basically crash, and needing to be force closed. So multiplayer still definitely needs some work at this point. So overall, the development of Cossacks 3, it feels a little underdone. There's no voice acting, there's no map variety, the writing is still a bit rough, basically feeling like it was written by a non-native English speaker, and some interface looks a little raw with just sort of raw text appearing on the screen. Like when you're trying to select another player's units or buildings, it just sort of writes the name on the left side of the screen. Settings are also a bit limited. In the development build, there was a grayed out button for rebinding hotkeys, but it seems it's gone completely now in the release version, and there's no interface options at all. And I do have to say there are no colorblind options either, so if you do suffer from any kind of color blindness, I would assume you would have some difficulty telling things apart, depending on the color people choose for their nation. However, gameplay-wise, it feels incredibly solid and well-developed. You can see where the focus was when making Cossacks 3. The strategy, the units, the gameplay, the formations, the whole war aspect, and actually playing the game feels ready. It feels complete. It feels solid. It's really, really good and really satisfying. And when I got the review code sent to me, they did say that they were going to continue developing the game throughout release and after release to continue to improve the game. And within 24 hours of release, they updated the game twice, fixing some major bugs and introducing multiplayer, which is still a little unstable, but at least it's there. So if they continue development, then this could really turn out to be something. Alright, so in conclusion, for Cossacks 3, it's an incredibly deep game that is brimming with strategy and tactics, but for gamers who are more used to modern, fast-paced real-time strategies, they might need a bit more effort to get into it. It's lacking some key modern features like proper matchmaking, replays, community features, customization options, etc. So it still very much feels like an older experience from the late 90s or early 2000s. But if you liked Cossacks 1, or any other older real-time strategies like Empire Earth, you'll probably like Cossacks 3. And if they continue to develop things quickly, then it could quickly progress into something amazing that doesn't just have great gameplay, but great style and personality too, along with an active community. Otherwise, it could end up being a great game that has a very niche audience. That niche audience will love it, but it won't be able to break into larger markets, keeping it to a small, close-knit community that enjoys Cossacks 3 for the gameplay above all else. Alright, so that's some kind of review for Cossacks 3. Hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. And I am always curious, for any of you watching who does have Cossacks 3, what do you think of the game? I'm especially interested in seeing the difference of opinions between people who have played the original or both previous Cossacks games, compared to those who have never played any Cossacks games whatsoever and have started with Cossacks 3. Let me know what you think. But either way, that's it from me. My name's been GamerZach, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.